Hey, thanks for the intro. My name's Andy White. I'm a technical architect. I've been working in the Salesforce space for probably getting on for 11 years now. And with regards to CRM Convergence, it's a scenario I've come across quite a lot at various different companies. So what I kind of wanted to take you through was my kind of guidelines for approaching a CRM Convergence scenario. So first thing to start with is, what is CRM Convergence? Let's just define that. So the way I would kind of define this is we say multiple companies or subgroups, divisions within a company that wish to change from using multiple CRMs or multiple Salesforce CRM orgs to using a single CRM org. Obviously, we're going to be talking in the context of Salesforce tonight, but that is kind of the general definition of CRM Convergence. This could be caused by many different reasons. It could be a restructure, it could be acquisitions, but that's it summed up. One sentence, seems fairly simple. Really isn't. There's a lot of challenges that you'll face from a technical viewpoint when coming across CRM Convergence. So let's just look at some of the bigger challenges that we're going to face. So to start off, it could be something as simple as each org having separate or even conflicting processes and functionality, and that needs to be replicated. The business has requirements and they have been fulfilled in their old orgs. We then have to face the challenge of bringing that across and somehow standardizing it. I mean, to be fair, just because two companies may operate in the same market in the case of an acquisition, but that doesn't even necessitate them working in the same way. So this really is one of the biggest challenges that we're going to face. Secondly, there could be some processes or functionality post-merge that wasn't even catered for before. Maybe there is a restructure and they're going to start working differently. So we also have to start looking at factoring in this change as well. Now, object models likely be different. I mean, how many of you here have kind of worked on multiple Salesforce orgs? Quite a few, yeah. Have you ever seen two orgs with the same object model? Exactly. That's kind of the point there, is that they're never going to be the same. So there will always be this aspect of data, of translation and restructuring the schema to work for both companies post-merge. Also, this is probably one that I should never really say being a technical architect, but some of the standard best practices actually struggle to cope with the divergent processes you may face, especially on the scale you may face. So while it may be fine to say clicks not code when you're in just a standard development scenario, when it comes to the case of CRM Convergence, what you might find is that clicks just doesn't cut it. And you shouldn't be afraid of that. That's just a case it is, that it is, but obviously that adds complexity. It also, may not be possible and feasible to apply this to other back office systems and processes, because we can't look at Salesforce just in a bubble, because that would just cause so many problems if we ignore everything else. Companies have other systems like access management systems or finance systems. We also have to consider the downstream knock-on effect to these. And without good planning, it's very easy, and this is the biggest mistake I've always seen, is that you'll end up with an overcomplicated and an inefficient org that doesn't do anything that you actually want it to do. So how do we avoid all these things? How do we deal with these challenges and avoid these problems? Well, what I've got for you is two theoretical models. And this is in a way, what we can learn from actual business practices, not necessarily technical practices. So I'm hoping to keep this not too technical, by the way. So for those of you who don't know the terms, two terms: vertical markets and horizontal markets. And these are business terms. So a vertical market is it's a company whose offerings apply to the whole of a single sector or industry, irrespective of where they're placed in that industry. Now, this applies to us when we say a company's expanding its market share or it's diversifying its offering. They could even be branching to another vertical market to cover, more industry sectors. In the case of this, you'll probably find the greatest diversity between those companies or the divisions, if it is a restructure. It's generally due to them dealing with completely different customers. A customer in the automotive industry will operate and interact with people very different to somebody in, say, the hospitality industry. So that's where you'll see that diversity. Now for a horizontal market, this is a company that provides something that applies to a specific need, irrespective of industry or sector. So this could apply where, say, a company's purchasing a competitor to try and take over more of the market, or they're trying to actually expand their verticality by buying something similar that applies to a different horizontal band. So why am I going on about these business terms when it's supposed to be a technical talk? Well, let's consider two companies, very, very imaginatively named A and B, and they're merging and they want to combine their Salesforce orgs. So this is what I would call when I can find my mouse pad, a vertical CRM model. And this is very much in line with what you'd see with the vertical market. See, we've got company A and B. This is post-merge. They share a Salesforce org, but because they are in a way different industries or sectors, they have very different ways of working, it's not possible to really merge that much. So obviously they share standard objects, but all of the custom objects, the custom functionality will be very much specific to either company A or company B. And this expands outside of Salesforce as well. We can see like they probably brought along their own orchestration tools. So they have their separates, they have separate off-platform systems. Even in the most extreme cases, you'll probably still see a shared finance system because of legal requirements usually. But this is, this is a very much vertical CRM model. And that's just what I told you. So this one is a horizontal CRM model, like the horizontal market. We can see company A and B, irrespective of who they are, we have one product that reaches across the entire brand. We have one Salesforce with one set of functionality, shared objects, shared custom objects, shared orchestration if it's there, and shared off-platform systems. So, question for you. I've just given you two theoretical ways to deal with CRM convergence. Both have their pros and cons. Which do we choose? So, just a quick show of hands. Who thinks that the vertical CRM model is the best way to go? Anyone? No? We'll get into that. And does anybody think we should be aiming for the horizontal model? Excellent. At least we've got 3 people there. Does anybody think that I'm asking a trick question? Okay.
I've just got in here, but I think
I'm actually not. It's not actually a trick question. The answer is, as you mentioned, it's neither one, because it is entirely dependent. But both of them are actual examples of a CRM convergence scenario that I have implemented, and both of them have worked. They're both very extreme cases, so there's nothing wrong with either, but chances are neither will be the right one. So how do we work out how to deal with a CRM convergence scenario? So this is where we get to the slight tangent that Chris mentioned earlier. So I quite like philosophy. Studied it for quite a while, and I've always thought it's got real relevance to the work we do in the world, the IT space. And as such, I have a very, very small, I promise, bit of philosophy for you. But first, does anybody else have an interest in philosophy? Yes? Okay. I might, you're probably going to have to forgive me if I horribly mangle people's words then, because I've been a little bit flexible with my interpretation. So we have this dude. This is Aristotle. I told you I was going to mention him. What did he say? He said, first then, let us consider this, that it is the nature of such things to be destroyed by defect and excess, as we see in the cases of strength and health. Both excessive and defective exercise destroys the strength, and similarly, drink or food which is above or below a certain amount destroys the health. 340 BC. What he was talking about there, just a little sort of translation, defect isn't broken, it's a lack of, is the context of what he's talking about here. So I'm going to very badly paraphrase this. What he was putting forward is the idea that virtue isn't found in an extreme, but in a moderation between the defect and the excess associated with a certain action or principle. You've probably heard of the term the happy medium. That's this. This is where all of that comes from. So how are we going to find our happy medium? Well, we're going to ask this guy. So this is Socrates, around the 5th century BC. If you're a fan of Bill and Ted, you may call him Socrates, and that's fine. So he came up with something called the Socratic method, probably, we think. To give you a very basic overview, what it means is somebody states a premise to him, something they believe is true. And then he would counter with questions or other premises, either to support it or to challenge it, and see if the original person agrees. And then they'd use that discussion to stimulate critical thinking and investigation of the subject, and then hopefully arrive at either the truth of the statement or the falsity of it. Now, why am I talking about this is what you're thinking right now. Why am I talking about this? Well, here is our scenario that we're going to deal with. This is going to be our CRM Convergence scenario. Aristotle asked Socrates to merge his CRMs, or achieving a technical happy medium. So how are we going to do this? Well, first, we're going to define the criteria. Now, these criteria, these are what our extremes are. So like Aristotle said, defect and excess, we're not going to use those terms. In the way of sort of the technical view of this, the two extremes are complexity and simplicity. So complexity is the extreme caused by, it's trying to preserve that current state of the merging companies, trying to keep that status quo, like in the vertical model, to allow them to operate as if nothing had happened, but that's going to lead to a very high level of technical complexity. So that's our one extreme. Then we have simplicity. That's the horizontal model. It's that desire for the technical simplicity and ease, but the problem there is that we can actually be forcing our effort of change onto the business itself and away from the technical team. So we can see from this quite easily, there's these two driving forces, the business team, the technical team, and we can see that the business would desire complexity and the technical team would desire simplicity. But we've already discussed neither of these is the best solution. So, let's look at our scenario and see where we can find a good solution in between these two extremes. So what's our situation? What's our scenario? We're going to say Aristotle Corp has acquired Plato Corp and wants to create a Salesforce org that will be used by both teams to enable a unified approach to selling their increased product offering. Both Aristotle Corp and Plato, I didn't change that, Plato Limited apparently, currently have a Salesforce org and varying other back office systems. So where do we start? That's our spec, but there are so many unknowns in there and so much room for ambiguity, we have no idea where we're going to end up on that scale. So how do we apply our take on Socratic method to this scenario? Well, we break it down into some small challenges. So let's look at the first challenge. The first challenge here is our on-platform functionality. So this is on Salesforce. So here's the premise that Aristotle's given us. He said, right, sales teams from both companies should use the same Salesforce org. It's the core of CRM Convergence. So what does our developer, Socrates, say to this? Well, he answers with his own premise. The teams have the same data structure in their orgs. Now, is this true or false? We have two extremes, so let's look at them. We could have a case where this isn't true and the divergence is so great we will implement two separate structures. Or, for simplicity, we could say, actually, this is true, we're just going to implement the same structure. But neither of these is going to be true. Neither of these is going to be the case, and both of them are going to lead to problems. So where do we find the happy medium? Well, we find that by sort of investigation into certain areas. In the case of data storage, we want to be looking at the common ground between the data held by the companies without referring to specific objects. We may find that one company has something called customer product, where they store products that were sold to customers. And we may found that the other company has an object called product sale, which is products sold to customers. Different objects, but the data concept, there's commonality there. So we have a way to sort of standardize and bring that together. We can also look into Salesforce best practice use cases and apply those to data requirements and assess the change needed in the business for those. So while the first one was trying to kind of was looking at the technical complexity required, this one is pushing us back towards technical simplicity. So it's saying, what of the best practices should we be applying in this case? And how, let's have that conversation with the business and say, look, how about, we look at this, what's the change involved? Because that's you'll see the theme kind of coming through here is mainly that, it's always a push. In this case, it's always a push and pull between the technical desire and the business desire, and where that kind of middle ground lies, and where we get, where the minimum amount of pain, the pain of change, where that lies. So, I mean, the final thing for looking at the data really is obviously what we can do on the technical side is look at sharing and permission-based solutions, for covering cases where data must diverge, because there's always a point where we will kind of hit a block going towards simplicity. This could be for security issues, for example, GDPR. We could be a case of actually this company, this sales team from that company cannot see this data, so we have to build in that technical complexity. But again, these are what we need to look at to understand how to start building our technical solution. Also on the on-platform, our developer Socrates is talking about the functional side of things. So he's decided to state, okay, the teams have the same functional requirements. Is this true or false? Well, on the complex side, we would be looking at it not being true, and the divergence so great, we will be building specific functionality for each company. On the simple side, we would be saying, yeah, that's true. Let's just build a shared set of processes. Easy, job done. 2 days, no worries. But again, it's finding that it's all about kind of finding that happy medium between the two. So again, we've got to follow the best practice guidelines for anything that's shared, because what we really need to build is kind of a foundation of shared functionality, and allow that kind of functional divergence to be built on top of that foundation. Because if that's not solid, then your whole system's going to start falling to pieces. So wherever we can identify those shared, we should always follow the path of best practice. For anything divergent, again, we come back to that discussion between the technical team and the business team of, how can we standardize? What makes sense to standardize? What requires, what changes are happening in the businesses as part of this merge that allows us to also change how the CRMs work and standardize them. We can also look at resources in each org, and resources in general, and this is another theme of CRM Convergence, is third-party products or pre-existing resources. Because these scenarios are usually probably, I don't know, the project would take about a year, maybe more, in general for CRM Convergence. It might be less if it's a very simple scenario, but I'd be very surprised if it took less than 12 months to do this. So how do we make it easier? That's a lot of work. Well, we look at the resources that each company already has in their CRM org, see what we can bring over, see how we can adapt them to maybe work for both companies. Or do they have third-party products in the system that maybe one company should have been using but they weren't? So again, we're building in those best practices, and we're looking at what's already there for reuse. We want to find, we want to find simple solutions for the complex processes. These are where the big divergence is. But there's one very key thing whenever sort of putting together a technical solution for a project like this, and that is that we have to ensure that we're not putting the burden on users. UX is very, very important, because when you're doing a rebuild of this scale, adoption can be very, very key. And on the technical side, you have a big responsibility to provide a good UX and a simple platform that can drive that adoption. So, like I say, we can make the most out of tools that, we can make the most out of tools like Process Builder or code-based solutions or third-party products to take that complexity away and kind of hide it in the background where it's not going to drive down adoption. And the last thing I'd say is always look at your MVP. Have that discussion around what is actually required. Do we have to replicate everything today, or can we build a small layer and then work on that in a phased approach later on? Because, as I say, this is a 12-month plus project for an MVP. That's not for full-blown, that's for the MVP. So the more you can minimize the actual amount that you're building for that first go live, then the less risk you'll have, and also the more successful the transfer will be.
This is where your Moscow comes in.
Yes, exactly that. And I've found that generally with Convergence, what you'll find is that everybody from, say, company A will be very much, we must have all of our stuff. and company B will be very much we must have all of our stuff. So again, that's why identifying the shared amount is so good, because it can start that conversation around actually what are we providing. So we're like, okay, well, your musts is everything shared.
Could you use that in married life as well?
I don't know. I'll tell you in a year's time.
It's also an opportunity to get rid of all the crap that both
Yes.
organisations do.
Oh yes, yeah, and that's what.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I mean about the simple solution for complex processes is you'll find a lot of the time that one company will have gone, oh, we bought a document generation tool, and the other company will be like, oh, that's good, because what we've been doing is we built this Visualforce page, and it takes this stuff from over, and you're like, whoa, okay, how about we use this nice shiny tool that's supported by a third party and way more functional than anything we could build. So yeah, again, it gives you that time to really sort of cull things down. But on the Moscow front, you really do have to kind of like take a bit of control about not everything being a must, or people will start having a fight. Oh, sorry. It's basically just a way for taking like your backlog of requirements and saying like whether you must do it, whether you should do it, could or won't. Sorry, the other two as well. So it's just a way of grading it of priority. So we talked about the on-platform functionality. We've seen how the approach works. So let's try applying it to an off-platform. So in this case, our premise is that sales operations teams should be able to grant access to both products in the same way. So how do we deal with this with off-platform? We're talking about an access management scenario here. So we're going to assume that the two companies both have an access management system and it's different. So again, Socrates saying both companies have their own AMS. So what's the complexity? Yes, we've got it, and they're going to keep them. The simplicity is actually we're going to go down to just one system. And how do we do that? This is not actually as easy as Salesforce. Looking in the world of Salesforce, we're actually, in a CRM Convergence way, we're actually kind of a bit better off than most people, because there's so much standardization between different Salesforce orgs, unless they've done something absolutely crazy, that what you'll find is that a lot of the challenges that you may face with other systems off-platform, you don't have to face with Salesforce. That's why I thought this would be a good one to go through, is because two Salesforce systems being merged, they've got some commonality out of the box. If you take two completely different competing AMS systems and try and push them together, not going to work, because for example, there could be completely different data requirements. There could be different functionality requirements. There could be different data structures. It may not even be hooked up in exactly the same way. They may have different ways of integrating. They may have completely different ways of sort of hooking up to whatever it is that provides the product that they're managing. And again, these are the same as we went through with the on-platform solution. It's stepping through the different challenges and thinking, okay, how can we, where's that point where we can kind of get as much simplicity as possible without actually breaking anything. Because, for example, especially with off-platform systems and things like AMSs, what you'll find is that this isn't just in-house people using it. This is providing a service to a customer. So we actually have to provide more on that front, because otherwise you're going to be, you can say to an in-house sales team, oh, look, for 2 months, you're going to have to do this little bit manually. But you can't say to a customer, oh, for 2 months, you're going to have to recreate your account every time you log in, because they're going to go buy a different product. So, we have to look into this a lot more than we would for Salesforce. And again, this is why I say the off-platform systems and the downstream impact is something we really have to consider. It can't be looked at in a bubble. There's also a bit around intermediary architecture, because obviously, this is what allows everything to work together. The general premise here is that the solution should be easily supported by the technical team without requiring very specialized knowledge, because your intermediary, this isn't a business requirement, this isn't a customer requirement, this is an in-house requirement to keep things simple, because anybody that sort of runs the technical department, they don't want to hire 10 new people, all with specific skill sets to have to deal with whatever solution you put in place. So we have to also consider that. So what's our our premise from last one from developer Socrates here. So he's suggesting that an orchestration system would be implemented. Now, the reason this challenge is quite key is because it shows something in that here complexity and simplicity aren't actual opposites. So in complexity, no, there will be no orchestration, and we'll do every integration individually. The simplicity scenario is also no, there will be no orchestration because we don't need it. So in here, looking at any sort of scenario with regards to CRM Convergence, and you're trying to assess, what is my complex scenario, what's my simple scenario, and where am I going to go in the middle, you have to also understand that these two extremes may not be opposites. They may actually be the same thing, but for different reasons. So in this case, we'd be looking into things like the integration requirements, understanding what the team's capabilities are, looking to third-party products, especially good if they already have them. And again, with the future roadmap, so as I say, always look at the MVP and what will be built later on, and then think, okay, is this tool necessary now but not later? Is it necessary now and will be great later? And again, all of these things drive your decision around where on that scale you decide to build your solution. So I did promise some guidelines. So this is basically sort of a summary of the key concepts behind finding a happy medium in any CRM convergence scenario. So first off, we have to accept there's no one-size-fits-all solution. It's the core issue. It's the reason we're having this talk today. Otherwise, it'd be super simple. So the first step to do it is approach it with an open mind. And it's why I kind of slotted in this slightly philosophical approach, because it's, there's no hard facts on this. You're going to have to take it as it comes and understand how to find where the correct solution is. Secondly, understand your preferred solution, which is the simple one, I'd assume, being technical people, and what would be needed to reproduce what's there today, which is your complex solution. Then work with the business owners and the BA, understanding the scope for change within the business, which pushes you towards simplicity. Understand where you have to use a technical complexity to fill the gaps that can't be standardized, which will push you back towards complexity, and then use that information and that point on the scale to design your solution. Always look for pre-built third-party solutions, because I can't stress it enough, it really does reduce risk and workload, and a project like this is massive. And work in stages to provide that minimum viable solution, and then build from there in the first phase if you have scope, or later phases if you don't. And taking that approach will guide you towards a good starting point for any CRM convergence technical solution. So, does anybody have any questions?
Sure. Question? Yeah. When would you recommend a completely clean org, and take, rather than adopting the larger company or even smaller companies org, when would you recommend a completely clean org and run that process through it? So
there's two reasons that I'd recommend a completely clean org. The first is in the case of bad practice or mismanagement of the orgs. So in some cases, I've seen orgs that have basically grown organically for 12, 14 years, and they're an absolute mess. And the thing is, when you're dealing with this, I've banged on about the scope and the size of this already. You don't want to be dealing with technical debt. There's just no scope for that. So if the technical debt is substantial, that might drive you towards using a fresh org. The other reason is if it's very similar to the vertical scenario, in the case where we have very divergent companies, because what you may find is actually taking one company's org and converting it enough to suit the other company is way more work than taking one org and building it from scratch to meet both their needs. Again, it's something you have to kind of assess on the fly, really. There's no hard and fast about any of this, but it's generally, you can assess the work, required to use an org and then assess the work required to use a clean org, which is usually around data migration. It's usually around functional migration and also building up from scratch. And that's kind of your guideline already. That puts you on the scale where you want to be.
Perfect. I have one other question. I'm thinking of a scenario where a company has purchased a competitor, and there is most likely duplicate data between the two companies' structures. So Joe Bloggs Incorporated bought from one, and then next year they bought from another. So there'll be two customer records. Best case scenario, there's normally heaps of duplicates. But as you're bringing in the data from the purchased company, is there any third-party tools or any approach that you would recommend in terms of data cleansing to make sure that your data is as clean as it possibly can be?
There's a lot. There's a lot of different approaches to data cleansing, and there's a lot of completely separate approaches to data migration. Generally with data cleansing, I'd always recommend looking into, as I mentioned, third-party products, not necessarily a product in this case, but in a lot of areas you'll find third-party companies that specialize in cleansing data in certain areas. They may even have access to a data bank to enrich it and that kind of thing. So it's always worth investigating that first. Doing it by doing it yourself or getting somebody in to do it is a possibility. Assessing your data quality first is generally the best step. Look at places where you've got Dot as a last name, for example. Choose your criteria. Now there are tools within Salesforce which can help with deduping. It depends on your amount of records, basically. If you're talking a large amount of data, then I wouldn't put that burden on an administrator. I would start looking at actual specific specialists that can handle it. And with the data migration, if you have an in-house sort of data person, great. If you don't, you can probably find one. Again, some companies that do the cleansing will also do the migration as well, and you can get it all as one package. But it's something that shouldn't be underestimated, because, as you say, it's very easy for two different companies to have the same person on their records, especially in the horizontal market style merge, because obviously they're selling across the same thing.